So now for the next part of phase 5, where we're creating our UI, we finished up with the UI for level 1, but we also want to jump over and create a UI for the start level and the end level. So in order to do that, we need to create a new level, a new scene. So again, you can either Control N on your keyboard or go up to File, New Scene. And now that we're over here in this untitled scene, we want to go ahead and save it. So let's Control S or File, Save Scene. Let's navigate into our Week 3 project and navigate into our Scenes folder. And here, this scene is going to be named Start. So now we have one more scene down here under our Scenes folder. Now in here, since the idea is our camera is going to be similar to the modifications we made over in the level 1, but that's pretty much it, because this is not a full like 3D level with stuff that's going to be in it or the light's going to be in the way. This is mainly just a menu, essentially. So we don't need to go overboard with all of our other stuff, and the canvas that we're dealing with in start and end will be different than the canvas that we prefabbed. The only reason we prefabbed level 1's canvas was so we can use it for other levels. Start and end don't need that modification, don't need that feature to make adjustments to them. So here inside start, we're going to pick the camera, the main camera, and we want to change its clear flags from skybox over to solid color, and change the background color. In this case, you can, again, it's subjective. You can pick whatever color you want. I'm going to go with kind of a uniform gray. So 127, 127, and 127 will give me that value. Again, I don't care about the alpha channel here with backgrounds. And now, in order to create the UI, all the different buttons, you could go through and manually create the text objects, the buttons, and that kind of stuff, and try to align them. But since they're all kind of following a similar pattern and we can kind of uniformly space them, Unity provides us some auto layout tools that we can apply. So what I want to do is I'm going to have two text objects, two text UI elements. One will be our title, the other will be our subtitle, and then I'm going to have two buttons, one for play and one for quit. So here inside inside the start scene in the hierarchy, I'm going to right click and go down to UI and pick text. Now I'm going to customize it in just a second, but I want one more text. So I want to duplicate the one that I currently have selected, so Control D. And I want a couple of buttons. Now, you don't necessarily need to have the canvas selected. You can also just right-click down here and it'll automatically add up there. But if let's go with the canvas first. So if I right-click on the canvas, UI, and then button, I could duplicate this button, or just to demonstrate the other way does work as well, if I, down here, right-click, UI, one more button, we get that as well. So now we have two texts and two buttons. Now notice they're just kind of wherever Unity decided to put them, and you could potentially move them around if you wanted to, but what I want to do is take all four of these items and make them kind of understand that they're part of a stack of items. So here on our canvas, if I come down to the bottom where we have add component, and I go looking through, we have a bunch of different components we can add for a bunch of different functionality. Under, I believe it's UI, we have a bunch of different things that we can do. Let's see, is it in here? Sorry, it might be somewhere else. Every so often these things, there's a bunch of them. So every so often kind of skim through and see where, what's available to you. So in this case, because I don't really care it's probably under layout, of course. So because I don't really care about where the item is, but I do know that I want to take these four items and lay them out, right? Layout. And I want to lay them out vertically. If I start typing vert, it will filter down and pick the item that or rather show me the items that kind of match what I'm looking for. And in this case, vertical layout group is exactly what I'm looking for. So what I wanted to do is hit enter to select that. And now notice by default it kind of throws them into the upper left hand corner. Here's a text, here's a text, here's a button, and they're all uniformly spaced. What I want to do is make some adjustments to the way this spacing and the way the alignment and everything else works out. Now, the spacing between these elements, I actually like, through a little bit of trial and error, kind of fiddling around with these values, I like the number 20. It's a good space once all these things come back together. The second is I don't want them to be aligned with the upper left, right here, child alignment. I don't want the upper left. I want middle center. When you pick that, they all come over to the center and middle align. So right there in the center. Now, down here at the bottom, child force expand, it's causing this to expand as tall as it can go in both the width and height. And I don't want those. So if I uncheck width and I uncheck height, all of our items come back to this kind of all squished together, but a spacing of 20. If I drop this back to 0, for example, you'll see they're all vertically aligned as if they're right on top of each other. Let's do this. They're all kind of right next to each other. Instead, I want them to have that 20 from a minute ago, so they have a little bit of spacing between them. This will compensate for things like the font adjustments that we're going to make here in just a second, make them larger. So that gets us all set up as far as the alignment, the vertical alignment, and also centered right here on the screen. That way, if you, for example, let's say if we, you can't do it from the canvas, but if you pick one of your items, you can kind of preview what the adjustments will look like. So here, if I kind of pull this down, we see that if we were on different resolutions or aspect ratios, it's centered as long as we come down to like right about there. Overshooting it, that's a different story. But it'll try to center it, and it'll try to center it horizontally as well. So now, let's go through and customize each one of these items. So the first item, we want to change its name. Instead of being text, we want to change it to be title text. Title space text. Its title, and by the way, if you click down through here on the items, what you'll notice is over here in our rect transform, which stands for rectangular transform, it's the 2D version of a transform. Notice we don't have really values coming from these items anymore. It says right here at the top they're governed by, or they're driven by, the vertical layout group. So they're inheriting their position and some other information. So we don't want to necessarily mess with them. We'll let the canvas handle them. So now the text, instead of being new text, let's go ahead and replace that with the title of the game. And that was Arkanoid. Arkanoid. Now since this is the title, I'd like it to be a little larger. So over here under font size, I'm going to crank that up to be 36. And what you'll notice is it immediately disappears. And that's because the truncation that this text box has basically just eliminated our values. We'll fix that in just a second once we correct for the overflow, but let's keep going down through with the settings. So down here under paragraph, we actually want this item to be aligned center because we're kind of trying to center straight down the middle here. So we want to use center. And just to keep things a little better visually, let's go with middle as well. So center, middle. Then let's change our horizontal and vertical overflows to both be overflow. And now our text comes back. Now let's also change its color. So for this first item, I'm going to make it red. So we'll go all the way up to the upper left. And again, it's 255.00. And if you mess with the alpha, your text, see it over there in my game view, it starts to fade out. So keep it at 255, keep it at 100%, assuming that's the feature you want, or the visual you want. You can actually mess with these things and create some pretty interesting looks. But for now, I'm going to stick with 255. The next item, this text space parenthesis 1 parenthesis, let's go ahead and rename it. First of all, we need to get rid of the parenthesis 1 parenthesis space that the duplication gave us. So let's get rid of that and go all the way to the left. And this item is going to be our subtitle text. So I'm going to say subtitle space text. And again, you can always go into rename mode to just double check that there aren't spaces at the far right after the T. If there are, it will potentially mess up the comparison stuff later on. Actually, we're not using this item, but in the end scene, we will be using it. So again, double check that kind of stuff because your code is doing a string comparison, and those things have to be exact. Otherwise, you'll get the placeholder text as opposed to the live text updating. So our subtitle text, let's go ahead and change it from being new text to here. Our subtitle, it's going to be kind of the name of the what's actually happening, right? From the Wikipedia page, we saw that this was the Voss escaping. So we're going to name it, or we're going to add this text, Voss, V-A-U-S, escape, E-S-C-A-P-E. I'm going to throw an exclamation point on there just because. Now the font size, instead of being, the title was 36, but I want it to be larger than its default 14, so I'm going to crank it up to 24. The paragraph alignment, just like we dealt with a second ago, we want to center middle to properly line it up underneath those two items. And the same thing with our horizontal and vertical overflows. We want to change those to overflow. And I want to change the color this time around. I want to make it green, this like vibrant lime green. So I'm going to change the colors here to 0, 255, 0, and leave the alpha set to 255. Okay. The first button in this sequence is going to be the play button. So in order to kind of keep with our naming conventions here in the hierarchy, I want to rename the first button to be play space button. And I'm going to come back to its functionality, what it actually does to the code in just a second. But underneath the text child, if you don't see that, hit that little disclosure triangle to expand it to see the text child. And here, I want to change the text so that it reflects what the functionality is. So, play. And then the same thing with the next button. I want to change its name. So remember, Unity gave us the parenthesis 1 parenthesis space. So go ahead and get rid of that. And this button we're going to name quit space button. And again, we'll come back to the functionality in just a second. But its text child, let's change its text to be quit. Okay, quit. And I'm not going to make any kind of other modifications. If you want to, you're more than welcome to. But now we need to hook up these buttons and actually make them do something. Now, I told you earlier, while we're at it, let's go ahead and just save. Periodically save. It doesn't necessarily hurt anything, unless you're actively testing something, but that's a different story. So now that we've made modifications in here, we want these buttons, when you click them, to do something. Now, in order to do this, there's a couple of different ways. You can set it up right here in the inspector, which is what I'm going to do, or you can actually look at the documentation. There's some sample code in there to be able to hook this on-click button up to code. It actually links to code directly, programmatically, as opposed to here inside the editor. But we've got other systems we want to concern ourselves with. So for the moment, with play button selected, down here under the on click, the list is currently empty. Well, I need to add something to it. So I'm going to press the plus, and we get this little entry. When I click that button, play, what is plugged in here will get executed. Now, the first entry here, runtime, this is, let's see, Unity calls it the Unity event call state. We don't really care about it. Just leave it as runtime only. Don't change that value. This no function over here, it's currently disabled. Function is also, it's the same thing as a method. It just means it lives somewhere else. This actually comes from C and C++. Over in C#, every one of our methods is a method. We don't have the location where these things can live. But here inside Unity, it actually does, because the core of the engine is actually C, C++. So this is disabled until we actually provide it some way to interact with some object. And right here, I'm actually going to move this over a little bit. You can see where it says none object. So we need to plug in some kind of an object for it to talk to. This is why we made the game manager into a prefab. If you take this asset, drag and drop it into that none area, you'll notice that no function now becomes enabled. Now it is important to remember that the game manager, because it is a singleton, when you start playing, if it's in your scene, if the instance is in your scene, it will leave the current scene and go into its own separate scene that won't be destroyed or purged from level load to level load. This will cause, if you accidentally slot in the instance from your hierarchy instead of the asset from your project window, if you accidentally slot that in, the act of moving from your current scene to its other scene will sever this link. It will cause your buttons to stop working after you either load into the scene for a second time or you load into it elsewhere for the first time. It'll look like it works right at the beginning because it's initially linked up, but then if you come back around, you'll sit there and press play all day long and it won't do anything. So please make doubly sure that you're talking to the prefab asset. And you can confirm that by clicking on it once, and it will highlight which item you're actually talking to. If it highlights something up here in your hierarchy, select it down here and hit delete to get rid of that entry, and then drag in the prefab asset. Asset down here, instance up here. You want the asset. So now that no function is enabled, if you click it, you'll notice we have access to the game object in general. We have a bunch of stuff for the game object. We have transform and a bunch of stuff related to the transform, like the kind of like the rect transform up here at the top, but it's for the game manager, which was not a 2D object, so it's just transform. But then we have game_manager. This is our script. Many things are available through the, if I go back to it real quick, through the class itself here that we have, and then also the mono behavior parent. This is using what's called inheritance. We actually inherit functionality from elsewhere in the engine, from another class named mono behavior. If you want more information on this, inheritance and polymorphism are part of object-oriented programming, and in order to see what's going on here, Unity has a couple of tutorials on it, really great stuff. But here, if you right-click it, you can see where it says go to definition, the hotkey is F12. If you click that, you'll be taken to where in the engine that class exists. And notice it's inside the Unity engine namespace, which is kind of like a class container, but a little different. But it has a bunch of other bits of functionality. So some of these things popped up in that list you just saw. It also has a parent, and you can F12 or right-click and go to definition, and we go up to the next parent. You can do the same thing with component. And here's where we get game object lowercase g, by the way. Here's where we also get access to transform lowercase t. Here's where get component comes from. So you see we inherit functionality from our parents. And so object also has some more stuff like the name of the game object. Here's where we have destroy. And later on in this lecture, we'll use find objects of type and find object of type. So yeah, lots of neat little little things. Just realize it's coming from our parents, our grandparents, and great-grandparents, and so on and so forth. And we just inherit all that functionality. So back over here, it's not just what we have in our script, but also what we get from our lineage. So if we go back to our play button up here in our hierarchy, and go back down to no function, down to game_manager, what you'll see is a number of different things. What we're looking for the play button to function is to load into a new scene. So we want right here in the middle, load scene that takes in a string. So when you click that, this little area underneath that no function will become a text field. You can actually type stuff in. And if we press the play button, where do we want to go? Well, we'd like to go to the level 1 scene. So I'm going to type in here, level space 01. So now we've established functionality back over to that code, our version of load scene, which calls the scene manager.load scene and tells it load level space 01. And if I said underscore a second ago, I apologize. It's level space. Just delete that and do it again. Level space 01. The names have to match. Okay? So now our quit button also needs some functionality. So just like what we did a second ago, we have the quit button selected. We scroll down in the inspector to the button component. Down here at the bottom, on click, let's hit the plus. And we need to attach it to an object that sticks around, and that's going to be the Game Manager prefab asset. So drag and drop. And now no function. Let's go down to game_manager. And let's find quit game, because this is the quit button. It's going to call quit game. Notice in the parentheses there's no information. So now that we've sorted all of that stuff out, you might think to yourself, well, that pretty much sets up everything in the scene. And you'd be almost correct. Remember that when the game first starts up, we actually want to start up the game manager. We want to reinforce those set resolution values, the full screen false and all that stuff. We want to make sure that at the earliest possible point in the program starting up, that our game manager is also able to start up. So the reason I linked the buttons to the prefab asset down here was so that we don't accidentally run into the prefab instance issue we talked about earlier. But we do need the game manager to actually start up first. So in order for as opposed to the one that's over there in level 01. So what we need to do is drag just a copy of our game space manager into this level, into this scene, just so that when we very first start playing, the systems that are inside Awake come online. Now remember, play button is linked to the asset. So if I scroll back down through the inspector and I click, it's highlighting down here, not up here. Be very careful about that. The reasoning I told you earlier was because the game manager transitions to another scene. We can actually see that here. So let's go ahead and save this scene. And if you press play, watch what happens to the game manager. It disappears from the start level, and suddenly this don't destroy on load level, the scene, appears. And if you expand it, you'll see the game manager is right there. Now, if we jump to level 1, remember the game manager, this is the first one. So if it sees the game manager over here in level 1, it's going to destroy this version. The one inside start is the one that we use throughout the rest of the program. It'll kill off any other, or it'll destroy any of the other ones that it sees as it continues going forward. The idea here is this is kind of a Unity best practice. You want to be able to play any one of your levels just by jumping into it and hitting play. Since we're going to have a bunch of systems that require a game manager, if you didn't want to start from the start level, then you wouldn't get a game manager, which is why we have a game manager here, just to fulfill that. It acts as kind of a placeholder object, as kind of like a dummy object to just fulfill the requirement that a game manager exists. It might not be the correct one. It might not have other settings should you decide to add more things to your game manager script. So just realize that this isn't like the full version. This is more like kind of like what we did with our update. This is more of a cheat code, right? It just allows us to play test the level, not necessarily 100% correctly, but at least to cheat our way past the initial stuff. Because this might be level 55, and you might be testing one thing that doesn't require you to play through the previous 54 levels, including start or whatever. Okay? So now that we're back in start, we have our buttons hooked up, we have our game manager, and everything seems fine. So let's go ahead and play. Let's see what happens. So right off the bat, I should be able to press the quit button. Notice it doesn't seem to be working. Well, what gives? This is the error that I talked about a second ago. When I created that canvas and those text objects, for whatever reason, Unity did not create the event system. So I can't click those buttons. Now I can try to add one back in. So right click, UI, event system, and this time I lucked out. This time it gave me one. But if you run into this issue and you don't get an event system, go ahead and save your work, restart Unity, and then try it again. Right click, UI, event system. Now that it's here, I'm going to go ahead and save the scene, and I'm going to play. And now that we're able to play, I'm going to hit quit, and I actually stop playing. The editor itself stops playing. So far, so good. We at least know that some of the functionality is working. So let's go ahead and try to click play and go into level 1. So when the editor comes online, let's press play. Oh, we get an error. What gives? Well, it turns out Unity needs to know about all your levels before it can actually go to them. You might have a bunch of sample scenes, a bunch of demo projects, that you pulled in from the asset store. Unity doesn't necessarily want to, and you as the developer don't necessarily want to have all of those extra scenes inside your final version of your game, right? The final build. So what Unity says is you have to make sure, and if you read the error down here, scene level space 01 couldn't be loaded because it has not yet been added to the build settings, or, and we're not really going to worry about asset bundles, but essentially it then says add your scene to the build settings through this path. And we were there a second ago. We were in File, Build Settings, this list right here, Scenes in Build. All of the scenes that you want to load into need to be inside this area. So in order to make use of this, let's go ahead and drag in Start. And where would Start go if I press the play button? That would go to level 1. And if I was in level 1 and I hit the escape key, where would I go? I would go to End, which doesn't exist yet, which we'll add in just a second. So there is no apply button or anything like this. You don't have to hit any of these buttons. Just go ahead and close this dialog, and they're automatically saved. So now if we play, we already verified that the quit button works. So let's press play, and boom, now we're inside level 1. And if we press the escape key, we get the same error, but this time it's talking about end not existing as opposed to the previous time when it was level space 01. So now we need to go ahead and handle the end scene. Now the functionality, the UI, the layout, all this stuff that we're seeing here in this level, the scene is going to be nearly identical, but we're going to have a few custom updates. So I'm going to stop the video and restart to the next one where we start building the end scene based on start. Okay, so I'm going to clear this out and join you here in just a second.